I've been able to go live. We're now live. It let me do it. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone to this panel discussion, this open forum discussion hosted by CSA Research. My name is Arl Lomel. I'm a senior analyst with CSA Research, and I'd like to introduce our panel just very briefly. We'll then have them say a few words about themselves, and we'll kick it off. Before I do that, if you're attending on LinkedIn, you are welcome to make comments there. We will see them on the platform where we're hosting this. You won't see the comments that are made on this platform, but when we have questions that are being raised, we will promote them. You'll see them on screen. So don't worry if you don't see everything that's going on. We will see what you're asking and we'll be able to respond to it. In this discussion, we don't have any slides. We don't have a set agenda. It's intended to be driven by your comments and your requests. So feel free to comment and actively engage with the panel. Before we kick it off, I'll just mention our panelists. Olga Beregovaya with Smartling, Alon Lavie with Unbabel, Mihai Vlad with Language Weaver, and he's joining us on this panel for the first time. This is our third time running this, so thank you for joining us. Jay Marciano with Lengu, Vincent Godard with Sistran, and Spence Green with Lilt. Olga, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Alon.
Okay, great. So my name is Olga Beregovaya. I'm currently Vice President of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Translation at Smartling. Been in the industry for over 25 years now and specializing mostly in NLP from both research and deployment perspective. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Alon? Oh, you're muted, Alon.
Indeed. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
So I'm Alon Lavie. I'm currently the VP for Language Technologies at Unbabel. I've been at Unbabel for about 4 years. Concurrently, I am still an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University in the Language Technologies Institute, where I was a full-time professor for almost 20 years. So I've long been working on machine translation technology and even more specifically on machine translation evaluation technology and translation quality technology for a long time, and have had a long history both on the academic side and industry, including a startup company in machine translation that got acquired by Amazon, and then a period of being a senior manager for machine translation at Amazon before joining Unbabel. Thank you.
Right. Mihai?
Thanks for having me. I feel very privileged to join your group. So I'm Mihai. I head up Language Weaver. Language Weaver is the enterprise-grade and government-grade machine translation solution. We also are the backbone to the AWS group. So the majority of the traffic is being served through Language Weaver. And amongst the obvious MT technologies and NMT technologies we develop as part of the Language Weaver suite, a set of other NLP capabilities, primarily MT quality estimation and summarization. And there's a lot of things that we can't share here, but it's super exciting to be talking with you guys on this exciting topic. So thanks again for having us.
Okay, Jay?
Yes, hi, everybody. Thank you, Arl, for the invitation to take part again. My name is Jay Marciano. I'm the Director of Machine Translation Outreach and Strategy at Berlin-based Lengu, where we create our own large language models to use for translation and summarization and text revision and so on. I spent 10 years at SDL. I spent 10 years at Lionbridge, and I'm the current president of AMPTA, and I'm really pleased to be here with two of the former presidents, Olga and Alon, as well. So we have a pretty stacked group of MT experts here, and with everybody else as well.
Thank you. Vassal?
Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent. So I'm the president and CEO of Sistran, which is the historical player in the machine translation space, going through all the the various technologies that were used. And Sistran is Paris-based with offices in the US, Korea, and Japan, and serving all type of customers from the end users through self-subscription to large corporation, and we also provide some on-premises, especially for our government customers.
Okay, and last but not least, Spence.
Thanks, Earl. Hi, everyone. I'm Spence Green. I'm the CEO and founder of Lilt, which is a company that came from the Stanford AI Lab about 8 years ago. We build an AI platform for enterprise translation and localization. It's been an interesting journey for us. We've spent most of our time in the localization industry hiding from our identity as a language service provider. And recently, we've been able to come back to being who we are, which is providing an advanced AI capability. So I'm just really so excited about the developments in the world over the last 6 to 12 months, and it's great to be able to talk about it.
Okay, thank you to all of the panelists for joining us. We're going to start out just to get things going with, I think, what is sort of the elephant in the room in terms of questions right now. And that's, with all the work in Gen AI, is it going to be replacing Neural MT? To put it more bluntly, are all of us, including me on this panel, dinosaurs at this point, or are we part of the wave of the future? So I'm going to open it up for your thoughts. Any of you who want to talk about this, what do you think about all these developments with Gen AI and all the work on Neural MT in the past?
I would maybe slightly reframe the question, Arl, for everybody, which is these systems are, these large language models are scaled up decoder side transformer models. And so it's just the latest architectural improvement in the history of developing systems that can do automated language translation. And they work well, and they work differently than supervised MT systems. Neural MT systems have worked, which themselves worked better than statistical MT systems. So it's just the latest advance, I think, in natural language processing that everybody benefits from.
Okay.
Yeah, I would second that. If I can just add a few thoughts on my here. It's not really one or the other. In a sense, I think maybe in a practical sense, there's a question about should I be using the current options that are available through some of the offerings with generative AI, right? With respect to like the GPT models or any of the other things for translation, or for machine translation versus using other options on the market. And I think Spence is right. It's really just an evolution. There's actually a lot of core commonality between all of these different products and services. And there's more choices now. So I think there's more importance to be informed and understanding of the alternative choices that are implemented commercially available and make smart decisions about how to leverage them. But it's not really a hard choice of whether to stick to one or the other.
Okay.
Maybe I could second what Alon said. It's, in my opinion, it's really not about the choice, but it's rather augmenting what we already have. And I also loved what Spence said about work differently, which means deployed for different scenarios. And as of right now, there would be different languages, there would be different contents, and there would be different purpose and intent behind the content. Are you looking for more fluency? Are you looking for more accuracy and else? So I agree, it is just one of the options that we can integrate into our toolkit, but I would not, at least not at this point in time, view it as a replacement.
Yes, for sure. And I also would like to remind that machine translation is not only dedicated to localization. You can find it in many other topics, such as automating some support systems, iDiscovery, or of course intelligence systems. So this is probably suitable for some use cases, but certainly not for all of them.
Okay.
And I'll jump in here if I can. So first of all, I really prefer the name foundation models even over large language models, because it really encapsulates the idea that these large language models form the foundation for other things that we can create with them. And machine translation or automated translation is certainly one of those things. And I think as we move forward, we'll discover the strengths of this new kind of machine translation. Something that's been very clear is that the contextual information in a translation is much more readily available to a large language model than to other neural MT systems, so that information from one sentence can be used to help inform the translation of the next sentence. So I think I certainly don't think we're dinosaurs. And even if we are all dinosaurs evolved into birds and we're just becoming birds.
And maybe, but I really like what Jay or how Jay framed the question and what Spence mentioned right at the beginning. I think maybe Gen AI can be defined. Let's maybe focus on large language models. I think this is where the excitement's coming from, and ultimately all of these models are generating text. And if we're looking at what's unique about these large language models and why we're so excited is they weren't necessarily trained or designed just to translate. They were designed primarily to generate or autocomplete text. And then surprisingly, we realized that they're able to do other things, and amongst them, we got translation. So right now we have a decision to make. Is like, do we pursue having one model that just is specialized on translation, or do we pursue this multifaceted Swiss Army knife of NLP capabilities? And that will be the answer to everything. And I think, as Olga mentioned, I think it's kind of like a false dichotomy in the end. It's almost like we're potentially going back in time when we had the SMT systems, which were primarily a string of technologies to achieve this SMT architecture. And then we got to NMT, and we were lucky that primarily the whole architecture is just one model. But as machine translation or NLP capabilities evolved, ultimately we ended up stringing more of these models together. So for instance, for Language Weaver, we were ultimately using some BERT models for quality estimation and some other things for summarization. So it would be naive not to tap into these large language models to ultimately deliver a better business value versus just being dogmatic about, that's it, this is the one model, and that's the answer to it.
Okay, thank you. So I think maybe we can conclude we're rapidly evolving into birds. We're not going the way of the Tyrannosaurus Rex or something, but we have some potential. So several of you had mentioned some of the ways that things that you can do with an NMT and with traditional things. So I'm going to bring the next question up. So what are the strengths that legacy MT providers actually have in this environment where there's a lot of hype around Gen AI? And I think people may be forgetting that there is advantages in having focused data and having purpose-built systems. So what would you identify as the strengths that you have?
Can I clarify that one more time? I think it's really important. I want to encourage people to understand that for a long time, this sort of generative AI moniker that's mainstream now, I think translation systems were basically the only generative technology that worked for a very long time. Like text generation for assistive writing or summarization just didn't work very well for a long time. So MT systems are a class of generative AI systems, supervised MT systems, or even rules-based MT systems from the 1970s. Those were generative AI systems as well. It's just, I like what Jay said, which is these systems now you can think of them as general purpose NLP systems. They can do lots of different things. They can do part-of-speech tagging. They can do text summarization. They can do generation. They can do named entity recognition. And it used to be you had to build task-specific models to do all these things. And now you get that in one generative system, which I think to the sort of moniker of a foundation model, it is a general purpose NLP technology that you can use for lots of different things that used to be very difficult to do, especially if you were going to do it in a multilingual sense. And so I think that's what's really exciting is a lot of these different NLP capabilities that are useful across languages that really only used to work decently well in English. You've got a general capability that can be used across a lot of different languages now.
Well, if I can jump in, there are a few characteristics that seems obvious to me. First one, of course, is the capacity to customize the models, easily and in a quite a streamlined manner with eventually a small amount of data. Second would be the performance we can get. Of course, if you have some high volumes, it would be quite complex with those models running on very heavy infrastructure. And of course, the third one would be confidentiality. A lot of customers, are wondering whether their data are going on the internet, and they would like to keep them for themselves, for sure. So I guess most of my colleagues would agree with me on those points.
And I'll jump in here for a sec. So in terms of the strengths that quote unquote legacy MT providers have, first of all, I'm not sure I'd use the word legacy, but when you get right down to it, language service providers, whether they're technology-based or human-based, have been answering the needs of translation customers. And I think that's the strength that they have, that they focus on the customer's needs, they understand the complexity of the language problems that our customers face. And I think that's primarily the strength, that generally speaking, companies that are jumping into this industry almost always underestimate the complexity of the problems that language companies or language technology companies actually address. So that, I think, is a great strength. And then, of course, there's the data issue as well, that anybody who's been collecting data since the onset of SMT has a bunch of data available. Any LSP has probably multiples of that available if they've been around longer than that as well. So I think data, and then focus on actual customer needs.
Maybe I can add to this. I think, first of all, I think we already mentioned the issue of trust, because machine translation systems have been in place for a longer time. I think confidence, user confidence in accuracy, factual accuracy of the translated target is probably there. With machine translation, it's going to, and Jay maybe speaks a little bit to what you're saying, but also the other thing, I think, just because of the way machine translation systems work, the accuracy and factual accuracy of the output and the correlation between the source and the target, if you really want to convey the same message, if you're not going into transcreation, is much more predictable with the existing machine translation models, which again services our customers better.
Yeah, and I think that, to be honest, the biggest difference to complete what Olga was mentioning is, and what Vincent mentioned is, like, look, throughput today much better with existing NMT models, regardless of the provider. It's probably faster to decode. Data privacy will be critical. Predictability of the translation is key. We have customers who want us to change the output. I think it's going to be mega hard to do this unless you control your own model, rather than just changing your prompt and hoping that the underlying technology doesn't change. But to me, the most exciting thing about these multifaceted models is the widening of the context. So the majority of the systems today operate on a sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph. And I think by widening the context of being able to upload or utilize a whole document as a context, I love this slide, it constantly turns off when I start speaking. It's good sensor here. It's ultimately it's going to be an amazing complement to the predictability and the speed and the data privacy and the benefits of adapting neural machine translation. So I think for the foreseeable future, we'll be seeing a pairing of these technologies. And I don't know, it's either going to be cleaning up the input or provide alternatives to the output, smooth out the output a bit better. So I'm still insisting that the combination of these technologies will be the right answer for the foreseeable future, rather than just one or the other.
I don't think I have a lot to add. I'm pretty much in agreement with what everyone already said. I think the important thing to really recognize is that enterprise translation requires fundamentally very nuanced decisions and controllability over the language that's generated specifically for a customer, a use case, a scenario, etc. And so I think the real benefit of what legacy MT providers and legacy technology providers in the space have is their experience and the ability to control and generate that very nuanced type of language that is specific to the customer and specific to the use case and scenario, and then to leverage indeed the more general capabilities, as Mihai was just articulating, in order to do that, leveraging capabilities that are available for many different NLP tasks, just as Spence was saying earlier, from the generative AI models in order to accomplish that very nuanced translation task.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the big takeaways here is at CSA Research, we get asked about a lot of these questions, and I'm channeling to some extent the questions we get in that I think a lot of people think this is something completely new and different. And I think one of the key takeaways here is there are some new aspects, particularly around the broader context window that Mihai mentioned, but this isn't something completely new. And there's a lot of expertise and knowledge around actually making translation work that comes from the specialist providers that you aren't going to get when you go to a developer who just throws up a large language model that does, 92 jillion different things. And so there's still a lot of room here for these providers. I'm going to bring up one of the first questions from the audience now from Wayne Borland. He's wanting to know what's about the impact on source creation and delivering localized versions at the time of source creation. So here I'm looking at bypassing translation in a sense and just creating parallel versions at the time. So it's creating different things for each market. What are your thoughts on this?
I brought this up last time, if you recall, on our last instance of this. I think that's a very strong observation, and exactly that's one of the things that I think is likely to happen. I think one of the long-term transformations that is quite possibly going to happen to the translation industry is exactly this. The short term is that in source language, it's just going to be way easier to generate content. We're already seeing some instances of that. So there's going to be way more translatable content in the short term. But in the long term, I think because of the impressive multilingual capabilities of these systems built on top of this new generation of LLMs, for some use cases, this is going to be easier to do than others, but there are indeed going to be increasing cases where content is generated at the time that it's needed, and it's generated from the start in the languages that it is desired or needed. And so the translation step, which is basically the secondary step of first generate, then translate, is going to disappear for those use cases. And that's going to be transformational, in my opinion, for the translation industry when that happens.
Yeah, Alon, we did talk about this on the last call, and this is 100%. When we start talking about new capabilities of these systems, this is 100% possible, and it works quite well, actually. And so omitting the translation step, which for a lot of enterprise use cases adds both delay and cost, especially for like regional teams operating in region. This to me is one of the major workflow transformations that's going to happen that hasn't really been technologically possible before.
So my concern in this area is that, and I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience, that you enter a prompt and you get a particular response from it, and then you notice that there's a factual error in it. And so while I certainly agree that this is a very, very interesting area for exploration, the question then becomes, is this a game of whack-a-mole? Do I have to go around finding all of the factual mistakes, and are they going to be the same in the different languages? And I think that's something we're just going to learn about as we move forward. Because if we're actually generating in all of those languages, I don't think we should really expect that the content will be identical in the various languages. So that I think is an interesting aspect. I certainly agree that this as for some types of content, this is just an obvious use case, and the more mundane or rather uninteresting the language is, the more usable this is. So we've done a prototype recently for a customer where they wanted to automatically generate product descriptions in multiple languages based on simply a list of specifications of the products, and it worked reasonably well. But the idea of then going in and making sure that the content's actually correct across all the languages seems to be, in some ways, potentially kicking the can down the road a little bit. If the factual, if the facts of the content change from language to language at all, then that could be problematic.
And maybe I could add to this. I agree completely, and it matches our experiments as well, where it would be fluent, but factually not fully accurate. I think it's also about the cultural relevance, right? Just because of the way the data and how much the data is skewed towards certain locales versus other locales. What we've seen is it would be linguistically correct, but it would actually reflect that prevailing language phenomena, which would be like perfectly fluent. I've spoken to a translator perfectly fluent Italian, and then from there you actually get it's perfectly fluent, but it's completely culturally irrelevant for the target locale, which Jay probably just complements a little bit what you just said.
Yeah, let's just be honest about this. I don't think the technology at the moment can do this. This is not a solved problem by any means where the technology is today for the most part. Jay, your experience, I trust that what you guys did was very competent there. But I think this is the direction in which things are going, and there's certainly going to be a lot of work to be done to ensure, for example, that factually content that's generated multilingually is factually correct in all of those languages and respects cultural expectations in each of the languages. So there's work to be done there. But I think what we've seen is that the door has been opened to this being possible. Like Spence said before, basically this wasn't possible before. And now we see a path that this is going to be possible.
I'll just say that in our internal testing at CSA Research, what we found is you could actually do a lot of this content creation in language. You just would tell it, okay, you're going to respond in German or whatever language, and then you could start using your English prompts. A lot of it comes down to how well the prompts are written, and I just last week heard about the new emerging job category of prompt engineer. And the expectation is these are, at least initially, these are people who are going to be making $250,000, $300,000 a year because there's so little expertise in this. Now, of course, I think that's going to rapidly change, but this capability is certainly one that enterprises are interested in. And in one of our tests, I ran an attempt to create marketing content for a maker of wind turbines. And when I initially read the German output, I sort of laughed until I realized I was laughing because I was thinking of it from what, if I were writing in English and translated it into German, it would be. And the things I were laughing at was actually where it was getting it right for what a German would have done. And so I had to get past my translation mindset and say, no, this is actually really good because this is what a German would write versus what I would write and translate. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and it comes down to how well can we manage these prompts and what is the learning we need for it. And it's still early days.
So Arl, the idea of it being a management problem, I think, is kind of central to us moving forward here. We're almost in the phase of be careful what you ask for technology. So because you get what you ask for or some version of it, and then you have to ask again and again. And I was reminded of when back at previous companies, I hired an absolutely brilliant linguist, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And my previous boss said, but you have to harness that brilliance. And I think that's kind of where we are with the prompt engineer, or I like the name the AI whisperer as well. It's kind of the same kind of name. But it's a very interesting thing where the variable is the way you're asking things. I think there's a lot of room here also for work and for understanding how to whisper to these AI systems, how to ask for what you really need to get.
Probably we could
like
ask an AI to generate the prompts by itself, maybe.
Say that again.
I think to Jay's point. Sorry, Vincent, if you want to say it again.
No,
we're talking about each other. Yeah, no, I really like Jay's idea, and I think what Arl was mentioning, maybe there is a new job category within linguistics. So instead of, we keep saying human in the loop, but the reality is that linguists are primarily affecting or correcting the output of the machine, and maybe they can take more of a central or more of a conductor role where, given the linguistic and cultural expertise, maybe they will be creating content or amplifying their knowledge for a given customer. Of course, lights off, right on cue. So I think whether we call them whisperers or linguists or cultural advisors or kind of like a new category of linguistic expertise, definitely I can see that developing going forward. So I think we might be going from seeing translators kind of like at the end of the conveyor belt, fixing wrong output and kind of like being more in control. It will take some time, so I think it's just a hypothesis, and we see whether customers would appreciate this, but it is a strong possibility in my view.
If I may add to this, I think one important thing is, yes, most definitely a job of a linguist would be reinvented, but how many prompt engineers with some knowledge of data science, some knowledge of computational linguistics, like the syntax for the prompts, the right structure for the prompt, can there be? I think there is another approach, which there is a prompt engineer that gives templates and guidance to the linguists, and the linguists are more of cultural advisors and actually users of, to a great extent, pre-engineered prompts. And at least that's the approach that we're taking. You set the foundation for them, but the linguists don't need to completely reinvent themselves and learn to in-depth a completely new skill. So I think you can, in other words, I think you can simplify it. It's definitely the way to go, but I think there is also a way for prompt engineers not to be a bottleneck, but rather open it to broader linguistic community, but by giving them the right tools.
Yeah, well, we can see that there are a lot of experiments ongoing, and what is for sure is that our customer, they want to implement some very industrialized systems, with highly automated processes, and so I think there is a long way to go before we could we can use those type of systems in those industrial environments.
All right, we've got now another question from the audience I'm going to bring up and see what we think, from Laszlo Varga. What are your thoughts on the role of content quality frameworks in the new generative era? As it turns out, language quality, at least fluency, is not the key issue with LLMs. And I'm going to add that this is one of the problems right now. When people evaluate the quality of output, frequently they're looking at fluency and valuing that more higher than accuracy. But from an enterprise standpoint, yes, fluency is more important, but accuracy is what's really crucial. So how do we balance these different expectations of quality when we've got these models that can sound so fluent that they can pass, whoppers of problems along? And are there ways we can manage this? I'm sort of riffing off Laszlo's comment, but
yeah. If I could start, I've been really strongly advocating that, particularly in this new world in which we're finding ourselves, actually leveraging this technology for creating highly accurate and detailed capabilities on translation quality evaluation is becoming critical. And the good news is that this generative AI technology can be leveraged very well, including the work, the LLMs that were already available, as pointed out over the last couple of years, to do much more accurate work on translation quality evaluation. And I think the observation here is actually very, very correct, that the problems now are not about fluency. These systems are very, very fluent. It is much more focused on accuracy. And we can actually use AI to largely and increasingly for more and more languages, for more and more detail, to detect problems with translation accuracy, and use that ability to have automated technology that detects translation errors to drive a process that's way more efficient in generating final translations that basically correct for those translation errors. I'm very, very active and passionate on that very specific technology. I don't want to spend too much time here, describing it in detail. There are other forums to do that, but I want to hear also what my colleagues have to say about this.
Yeah, Alon, you and I could geek out about this all day, but we'll let others talk.
Maybe I'll say one thing on this topic, and maybe I'm pandering a little bit to Arl and Alon, because it's true they have been talking about this for a long time. Like Alon, I have a research background, and one of the most surprising things to me coming into this industry is that everybody, and this was years ago, everybody wants quality. And if you say you want that, why are the quality approaches from even the largest companies so ad hoc and informal? And it seems, and I again, I don't want to establish a causal link here, because this is just mostly anecdotal in my own observation, which is that there seems to be a lot more of a movement in the last 6 months or so towards adopting things like MQM and more formalized frameworks for doing assessment. And you certainly need that when the fluency of the text is so high and the errors are harder to catch. And so it seems to me, whereas less formal frameworks were fine for catching obvious problems, you've got to be more structured and formalized as AI generated text shows up in the supply chain. Because I think that's the thing that maybe not everyone's like fully privy to, which is that whether you like it or not, translators in the supply chain are using ChatGPT right now. So whoever you're working with, that's in your supply chain, and it's getting submitted to you. And if you're going to catch it, you've got to like level up your whole approach to quality assessment.
Yeah, it's gone are the days when you could easily spot the linguists who were just submitting MT and hoping to skate by, because
that's exactly right.
So different now.
That's exactly right.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this one? Okay, if not, then the next question I've got for you is one that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately. And it's, how do we avoid the English rules problem? And to give a very specific example, I was playing around with ChatGPT and trying out various queries, and I was feeding through Hungarian text, and completely innocuous Hungarian text. It was from a very old book, and it was an author just complaining about his audience maybe not liking his book. But there was really nothing offensive in it, and I kept getting warnings from ChatGPT that I was submitting something that violated the content guidelines. I kept saying, well, what's violating this? And I finally tracked it down to a single word where it seems like they just had a regular expression catching offensive words in English, and it looked like an ethnic slur, even though in Hungarian it was just a common pronoun. And so I couldn't submit these queries because all the development work was going around English. Do you see any ways that we can get past this long-term bias towards all the development work in English going on that then doesn't happen in other languages and can actually cause harm in other languages or lead to neglect in them? How can we move forward to see that we get greater linguistic inclusivity?
So one thing that I would say is, as a native speaker of English based in Europe, that there are huge calls here for a European large language model, and the idea here is not unrelated, or where the feeling here is that the development is going on at a few large companies in the U.S. and a great deal of work going on at very large companies in China. And I think as we move forward, what it's going to actually come down to is not so much regional large language models, but really customized models. And so the rules that you're talking about were very likely things that were added during the training process by the human evaluators who said, well, we can't have stuff like this in there. And as the power for training these systems is put more and more into the hands of either the corporations or the end users or whatever you want to call them, then I think we move away from this problem, because to me it's not so much English rules, but somebody other than my rules, basically. And then by allowing training of these systems down to a corporate level, maybe even beyond that, could possibly simply make this question obsolete.
Well, I'm actually going to
You know,
interrupt very quickly and just say that one of the questions is exactly about that, and I've just brought it up on screen. But who was going to say something?
it was me, Earl. So I wanted to add to what Jay mentioned, is like maybe clarify what we're talking about here, or what I think we're talking about is like, we talk about large language models. Most probably our experience is grounded in very likely using OpenAI's large language model through the ChatGPT application. And I think what we're seeing is not the way the large language model behaves, but also maybe their safety layers and maybe a set of other capabilities. So maybe it could be that your experience was triggered by a filter that sits on top of the foundational model that prohibited you to interact. Maybe they just set the filters in English. And I think Spence made a very interesting point. And it's like, if you actually work in building these models, then you have to withstand let's say the critique and the challenge being brought primarily by the localization industry and the translators, and you're like, oh my God, we got this thing wrong. And all you've done is like tried your best with your engineers and researchers to build this unstable chemical of a machine learning model, and it got one sentence wrong, or it got one thing wrong. And everyone is kind of like jumping on this particular example as being, this is a proof that the model is biased. And in reality, it's like, I think people from OpenAI and LanguageWeaver and Lil just trying desperately to build kind of like the best possible models. And it is not necessarily a function of wanting to, choosing the wrong data, but literally just trying really hard to balance the training data and putting some rules on top of this and making sure we eliminate the edge cases. I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, it's hard, but at the beginning of this, and we're to a certain extent anthropomorphizing, or we believe that OpenAI should be dealing incredibly well with all the cases that enterprise grade machine translation and MT machine translation systems are dealing with already. They haven't set out to be the best translator. All they set out to do is just come up with a use case on how to interact with these models, and we're kind of like wanting them to be as good as a state-of-the-art machine translation solution. So anyway, I just want to put this lateral view on the topic.
Yeah, maybe. Sorry.
I'll just toss in that you were right there, Mihai. If I ran it through the API, that didn't trigger it. It was actually a JavaScript layer in the ChatGPT interface that wasn't even letting me submit it. So it was happening in browser. They had a list of forbidden words that were made in English, and I just happened to run afoul of it.
I actually came across a completely different issue with Russian. It looks like the Russian filters are actually way more forgiving, both in terms of profanities and both in terms of potentially harmful content. So I think a very simple poor boys interim solution for it is actually add your own platform layer on mitigating those issues. Mm-hmm. So Arl, my experience is completely different. I could submit whatever I pleased and get whatever the response I pleased. So I think while the models are evolving, and I agree with all the methods called out before, there are also other NLP ways we can mitigate it within our solutions, at least for the time being.
Okay.
I think, again, it's a reflection of just where this technology is at this point. The need for the providers right now to put these guardrails in on top of the things in ways that are very, very rigid and actually not even that smart from an AI perspective is just because of like the limitations of where the technology is. Ideally, there are just aspects also of guardrails that are just not being addressed. And this is work that's actually interesting work to be done over the next few years about actually how to train these models to actually have the kind of properties that we would like them to have and avoid doing things that are harmful, and not just even from safety perspective, but just cultural perspectives and other perspectives. And I think that work is going to happen. But the moment you get these weird kind of situations like both Olga and you are were reflecting about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think this idea of building in your own custom guardrails is probably in the long run what's going to need to happen, because there will be some audiences where, content will be appropriate for one audience and not for another. And I think a lot of this, of course, has been driven by the media scrutiny of things like OpenAI, where, they had the advantage they launched just after Galactica got squashed for those kind of problems. So they were able to quickly put in some guardrails and start trying to resolve these problems. But we have to remember these models themselves don't think about these things. They don't care. And so there's this whole management task alongside the models for how do we make appropriate societal decisions. I think it's going to be a long time working through that. Okay, I wanted now to come back to one of the questions. I had it up briefly on screen, and this is about the customization and the challenges of this. Of course, for NMT providers, that's been one of the strengths for a long time, is this ability to easily customize models. But if we're looking at the foundation models, these large frameworks, are we going to see easier customization and subsetting and making things more efficient? What's the trajectory you're seeing?
I can speak to this one. So, our system learns from human feedback, and that was the original innovation. And so it fine-tunes the model weights to human feedback. And that in-context learning approach has been, I think, challenging for people to implement. So the traditional approach of just training a model in batch and then deploying it and then retraining it again sometime later, I think has been one of the real challenges with deployment of MT systems, because language use shifts not over the span of months or years, but over the span of hours and days, depending on how you're using them. And so with these models, you can do a form of in-context learning, which is just prompt engineering, which we were talking about earlier. And then you can obviously also do fine-tuning as well. And so there's been some really interesting work. Stanford NLP group published a work about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then Databricks has got a model out of much smaller scale systems than a GPT-4 scale system, where you can do instruction tuning and fine tuning with relatively low compute, and you get very good results. So I think that the approach to in-context learning without having to do any model training is super exciting, and broadens the ability of companies to be able to fine tune to specific tasks. It does take expertise, but that's really cool. And then I think adding fine tuning on top of that helps even more. And so these sort of capabilities, I think the sort of batch trained MT model, that's going to go the way of the past, because in context learning just works so well you can really specialize to each task.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yes,
Yeah,
for sure. Maybe because it's mentioning OpenNMT, which is a kind of the baby of Systran. So we are currently continue to do some those batch training, and truly speaking, this is what delivered the best results so far. And we have been measuring against quite a lot of experiments. Combining this with TM enhancing even goes beyond. So yes, maybe this somehow will be the past someday, but at the present moment, we think it's still quite performant.
Yeah, I think I fundamentally agree with what Spence and Vincent were just saying. I think that the days of static adaptation of training, specifically in fine-tuning models, offline for a specific customer use case, and then only retraining those periodically, even automatically, are increasingly going to be behind us. We've seen, the approach that Spence and Lilith be pursuing is dynamic and adaptation all along, but I think in general we're going to see the combination of both fine-tuning on the fly plus what is already available in these new models of prompting on the fly and few-shot examples on the fly. There's still work to be done there to settle exactly technically what is the right combination or optimal approach, but it's going to be all about one single model that then gets specialized using customer data at translation time to generate contextually appropriate translations, and that's increasingly going to be successful in the next few years. It's pretty clear to me.
Unless anyone else has something to say on that, then I'm going to bring up one more question, which is probably a little bit more speculative because we're all, specializing in MT. But when we look at this, there's a bit of a data problem in the old, 1990s era TMX approach for data, where we lose context and other things. So how do you see other technologies adapting to support the requirements of this greatly improving area of MT and the need for context and all these other things? A lot of these technologies just aren't ready for it. So what would you like to see happening in the TMS TM front?
Maybe I'll give it go for it, Olga, please.
No, mine is very, very simple. I'm really curious what's going to happen to the TMX standard, especially when we're talking about generating the target. I'm really curious about what's going to happen to the alignment, and I'm really curious about what's going to happen to the CAT tool. Because obviously all of these things cater to the old scenario, like here is your TM, here's your fuzzy matching. And obviously right now, since the translation or content transformation scenarios are changing dramatically, I'm expecting changes to what TM actually means, how it's actually structured, and how those TMs are written to by be it translator, validator, or maybe the older term post editor. So that's where I would see most change from practical implication.
Yeah, and look, if we're looking at the localization supply chain, which is ultimately like quite a large billion-dollar industry, it will take some time for things to change in production. And I don't know, zero shot, few shots, on the fly adaptation will take some time to prove that that's the case. But what I was saying is that I think the concept of an MT provider or a TMS provider or CAT provider, I think disappeared. I don't think we have pure MT providers or pure CAT tool providers. I'm seeing lots of vendors adopting some NLP technologies and dipping their toes into some quality estimation. I'm seeing MT providers bringing some capabilities to train on the fly and bringing some editors. So I think we're going to be seeing some kind of a convergence of smart tools that are able to help the localization process get better and better. And I hope that this new technology is going to be accelerating a conversion to a faster process. I think Olga has a clear point. I think the sequential further down the chain and a very stepwise approach is likely going to change, but maybe not so fast as we would want it to.
And I would jump in here and just say, perhaps provocatively, TM is dead, other than as a data format for creating these systems. So everyone knows that fuzzy matches below, well, the number keeps on going up, right, in terms of what's a valuable fuzzy match. And we're basically at the point now where 100% fuzzy match is a valuable match, and anything else you'd want to submit to the MT system. So translation memory and by extension, TMS is a workflow engine, and maybe we just call it that because it's not really a translate. Well, depending on when you were introduced to the technology, it was either translation memory system or a translation management system. But it's a workflow system, and that will adapt. We still need workflows in order to work on some kinds of content, or really any kinds of content. But translation memory is something that a translator uses on a day-to-day basis. I think will very, very quickly become just not state of the art.
I tend to agree. We've been at CSA Research for a while predicting that we're going to see the eventual dissolution of the boundary between TM and MT, because logically it's the same data. And yes, there's a question of immediacy and context, but really these things should be relying on the same data pool to do things. And so I think this is the way it's going to have to go. Our current paradigm was established in the 1990s based on technology then, and it's held on for a long time, but I think the time has come to see substantial change.
Yeah, the summary of it is basically that customer-specific enterprise-specific translation memories as an asset, as a data asset, as a database of translations for that customer is going to continue to be extremely valuable. But any technology built on top of that for retrieval of previous translations or matching against that or anything like that is dramatically going to change or completely disappear, because fundamentally it's just a source of implicit information about the customer's translation preferences with respect to terminology, with respect to style, with respect to other things, and that's going to be the source that feeds into these models that are generating translations for that customer as a data source and nothing else.
Yeah, so the data becomes more valuable, but the application, as we've understood it so far, is probably going to go away. I've got one last question from the audience, which we're just about out of time, but I think it's maybe a good one to end on. So Konstantin asks, what do the panelists think about today's news that Newswire adopted GPT for website translation at scale? Does that mean that OpenAI is actually ready to rival DeepL, Google, and other providers? I hadn't heard this news yet, so I'm springing it on everyone probably as a surprise.
Maybe I can speak to it a little bit. Quality-wise, as we know, we're still on the fence, right? Is it delivering the same quality? What is quality? Is it accuracy, fluency, adequacy? I think the problem, and you brought it up earlier, we need to solve is the price point. And I've had those and it could be very myopic, but I'm having those conversations with customers like, hey, why do I want to deploy A, B, C, D when I can do it at a fraction of a cost? So there could be other factors, other driving factors behind this decision, but I think that's something that we definitely need to tackle.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, it's all about risk management, right? It's about figuring out what risks you're willing to tolerate with respect to accuracy or risks of making accuracy mistakes versus, more expensive processes. But, the technology is changing fast, and the way that all of the providers, including us that are represented here, are leveraging the technology in effective ways is also changing quickly. So there are going to be other intermediate, points that are much more cost effective than traditional approaches, but provide higher guarantees and lower risks for translation errors. And that's the game that's going to be played, in my opinion, over the next few years.
Oh.
Yeah,
I agree.
This is one use case, and probably this is one use case very suitable for this technology. But everybody should keep in mind that there are many other use cases for machine translation, for which, on the contrary, the legacy MT vendors, as presented earlier, are going to be much more suitable.
Yeah, just to follow on what Vincent was saying is like, by the way, I really want to correct the records. Like, I really don't like this legacy player thing. It's almost like if Apple decided to use C++ versus Java, doesn't make the company legacy. So, but on the other hand, I welcome buyers and customers using a different technology, because it ultimately just propels the industry forward. And look, whomever provides the better technology for the right content, the right price, with the right speed, with the right privacy guardrails, with the right throughput, will win. And if you do a good job, customers will choose us. And if we don't, they won't. And I think ultimately will work itself out in the end. And I think it couldn't be a more exciting time to be in this industry.
Okay. I think someone else was going to chime in.
I was just going to mention something about the particular use case of using a large language model to translate the news when the training of a large language model has stopped at some point, and then to use it on today's news might give a rather skewed report of what's actually going on at that moment. An example that I had was, while I was checking out ChatGPT, was asking for information about actually my wife's godfather, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics 2 years ago, and ChatGPT at the time 3.5 was unaware of that. And so I asked for a biography of this guy, and it didn't know that he had won the Nobel Prize. So using something for news like that, I think it's not like a Google Translator DeepL have been trained on the very latest news either. So so if the question is OpenAI ready to rival them, then sure. They're a rival. And I think it's going to get down to just specific use cases, as we've heard various versions of that during these talks. So we have to be careful of applying tools where they make sense to use.
Yeah, and I'll say, just as a last point, I don't have knowledge of this specific case, but I would imagine, one thing that I think will be a way of the past is these sort of bake-offs of different systems. Like, does this system work here, work there? When you have a foundation model that you can do in context learning on it, it's just a lot easier for a customer to get started, to customize to their specific use case rather than having to go through this big bake-off process. So I think it's not as GPT-4 a competitor. It's like, is this approach that Alon was mentioning earlier of stacking up prompt engineering, fine-tuning, data customization, that whole approach to get started for a specific use case, competing with the previous regime of evaluating, doing a bake-off with a bunch of different systems and then like trying to figure out what to do.
Okay. So we're out of time, but my takeaway from this is it sounds like all of you are optimistic about the future. I think I don't see any of you as pessimistic in any way. And even if some of our customers, see it as this is going to replace MT, it looks like all of you are seeing it as an opportunity to probably do all the cool things you've wanted to do all along. And that it's an exciting time to be in the MT field. It's not the end of an era. It's just the dawn of great things. So I think we can take away that positive message. And I want to thank all of you for your participation. We'll schedule another one of these in a few months to see what new things have emerged. We live in interesting times, to quote the apocryphal Chinese proverb. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.
Liv. Thanks,
Thank
Al.
you.